All right.
All right. So, welcome to Film Under Quarantine, a program of the Film Society of Northwestern Pennsylvania. We are here tonight to discuss Spaceship Earth, the new documentary from Neon. My name is John Lyons. I'm the director of programming for the Film Society. Why doesn't everyone introduce themselves?
I'm Erica Berlin, the Executive Director of the Film Society.
I'm Jesse Olszewski, a filmmaker and project coordinator at the Greater Erie Film Office.
I'm Mike Berlin, Erica Berlin's husband.
And we're joined by John Vanko from the Film Society Board. So a little, I guess, recap on the story of the film. So we've got, we might have to mute you, huh, John?
Yeah.
We'll give John a mute for now.
Mute. Mute him. Raise your hand if you want to talk.
It's all good. It's all good. All right, so obviously what a big part of the film focuses on the construction of Biosphere II and how that situation ends up. Such an ambitious project. I was fascinated by these people. This is like the most productive hippie commune I think I've ever heard of in my life. Just to recap some of the things that, the background of them. They built a dome, an ocean-ready ship that they traveled the world in. They did a touring theater on every continent. In the 80s, they held conferences on biomes and the planet and gave early warnings of the climate crisis. They talked about sustainability on Earth. These were like pioneers of the movement that I did not know. So I'm curious if you guys want to tackle, like, it's essentially probably the first half hour, 45 minutes of the film, and what you thought of this group and their background and everything they pulled off, just coming together and had a dream and just kept going.
Well, I was really impressed, kind of like what you said, the group of people. It's kind of magical when you think about how these people came together and were so not just creative and expressive, but incredibly smart and mechanically inclined, and also caring for the environment kind of came out of that. But really starting with like very movement and expression and theater, and really, I mean, it comes down to John Allen. I mean, I think they were part of the 60s San Francisco I don't know, cultural revolution. I guess it was probably part of that, but John Allen was really this catalyst to bring all of his education and experience. I mean, he has like the most interesting background in education, both kind of as an artist and as an engineer. And truly his leadership was what allowed all of that to take place. Any kind of group like that needs a leader, needs someone who organizes and says, okay, let's do this, let's do that. I wasn't really sure how it went with him and like the women in the group. I felt like the movie didn't really explain that well, because you had different women in the group saying, yes, we had a relationship and it was based in friendship. And then he married another one. But to me, it was not really very clear what his relationships were with the women in the group. I think when I think about cult, I think of like a male leader with a lot of, sexual relationships with women involved. And I don't know if that was the case. I don't think it wasn't the point of the documentary, but that's an open question mark for me. but in no way did it make me feel, it didn't discredit it at all for me. Like I had so much respect for this group the whole time, like from beginning to end. I think that's the intention of the filmmaker, of the director, and he achieves that. You know, you are rooting for these people and you build this esteem for them throughout the whole movie. And I think he did that very well. But I was impressed with them as a group of people. I'm interested if any of you know of any other groups that achieve what they have in the modern sense. I mean, probably maybe like early tech development in California, maybe like a Steve Jobs and people like that. I don't know if they, you know, making tech in a garage, is that really creating that energy? I don't know. I don't know if anybody can think of any other groups. I'm sure throughout history, there's been all kinds of intellectual movements and artistic movements, but I'm not learned enough to draw a comparison.
I don't know if John can jump in yet, but I do want to hear from Jesse and Mike too, and see what you guys thought before Biosphere II. What did you think about the story in this group?
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed like a big adventure lifestyle, and it made me want to like get together with my theater friends and make a troupe and just tour the world. I don't know of any other groups that were just the things they tackled spanned so many different fields. I can't think of artists who blended and got into science movements as well. It did remind me a little bit of the Venus Project, which is a program that's in Florida, but that was all kind of spearheaded by one guy who he lived through the Depression and kind of realized like all of our socioeconomic problems were related and started coming up with solutions. And he basically envisioned a whole new world, not just a dome, but like new cities, new transportations, new forms of economy, new forms of government that kind of would be a better way. And I do recommend people check that out. That's what it made me think of a little bit. But I would totally.
Jesse, I thought of you. I wanted to ask you specifically, what do you think? Well, I mean, because a lot of this started in kind of this movement and expression and theater, how do you think being a theater artist, like writing and performing original works, how do you think that might prepare someone to be part of a biological experiment like this, or part of a group that is engaging in scientific research? How do you think that prepped people? Did it make them more capable because of it?
I think
what does it like being a theater person?
The documentary definitely kept replaying the exercises, and I think they tried to make it seem like, oh, he's controlling all these people and getting them to run in the circle. It's not really like that. Those are usually like trust building exercises, and they're really just to create a sense of comfort between you and the other actors. So if anything, I would say it prepared them to just be more confident and work well with others. I don't think the type of training and experience you get in theater doesn't really set you up to like build things, maybe like sets and stuff, but it's, you know, those are like interpersonal skills, not spatial skills or stuff like that.
Yeah, building an ocean-ready ship is like, that's next level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then there was the one scene where he said, you know, when I was thinking about who was going to go in the dome, I looked for people who didn't follow other people, and I think that early group was probably all the same way. They were people who were willing to learn any subject to get the overall vision done.
Mm-hmm.
Mike
And
Berlin? Oh, sorry.
I think they probably, well, just to close that loop, I think what you were saying with the trust building exercises, that probably is a huge piece of it. Like having trust, I mean, these people all had to really trust each other. They not only had to be confident and not followers, but they had to truly rely on each other to live and really trust that the other person was doing their duty, doing their job, you know, once they got into that biosphere. So to me, I think that, like you said, trust building is probably one of the helpful skills, exercises, if you will.
Jump in, Mike, on the early days, and we'll see if John's able to jump in too, if it's a little quieter at his place.
I mean, I don't have. I'm more interested, and I have a more interesting thing that I'm interested in discussing a little bit later and stuff like that. I think it's interesting as far as this, to sort of segue what I want to eventually talk about on some level, is that you got to think about historical sort of impact of the hippie movement and stuff like that. And, you know, and I know that this will upset, you know, some people who were there and stuff, but like to me, on some level, the hippie generation is really the generation in the movement that sold out. Not everybody. And it's nice, and it's sort of relieved. It's nice to get a story about, you know, true believers who really tried to see it through and practice what they preach on some level. But like the hippie generation is the generation that leads into some Reaganomics, and ultimately they are undone by, you know, probably people who once upon a time were part of their movement who became counter to that. And I kept on expecting, and to sort of foreshadow a little bit, I kept on expecting the story to go a different way, maybe because as a viewer, I've been conditioned at this point. There's the one documentary on about the cult on Netflix. Forgetting the name of it. It's the 4-part series.
I know the one you're talking about. The one in Washington.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, yes. And as a viewer, you know, I think I've become, at this point, it's like, okay, when's the turn? You know, when's it going to flip and stuff like that? And this did not go the way I thought it was going to. They really tried to remain true to their original intent and purpose. And that adds a degree of tragedy, ultimately, to what ends up happening. Because it, you know, they are, and we can talk about that on some level, but it's interesting,
Yeah,
to see such earnestness.
I'm going to unmute John Vanko, and let's see what John has to say about the early days of the movement.
I don't know of any comparable group, anything that even comes close to that. I mean, I think of, you know, traditional circuses, and but that's just one dimension of what they are. And, you know, creative enterprises like the Roycroft in East Aurora, the Roycroft so-called commune, and then, you know, like hippie communes like the Hog Farm, Stephen Gaskin, that kind of stuff. All of which had some level of success, you know, and Hubbard's interesting because his enterprise, you know, was also essentially the wealth that he accumulated by participating in the free enterprise system. He was a very successful business person, made a lot of money. He was a salesman, and took it to selling ideas. And to some extent, this is like that, but it's different in that John Allen doesn't project himself as in the same, I don't know, in the same way that all the other examples I can think of, you know, where they emphasize their leadership aspect, and his leadership style as portrayed in the movie is just remarkable. It's like, I was altogether totally impressed with. I mean, I remember the Biosphere and everything, but you know, you just hear. I never dug into it. It seemed like very much of a media event, but that's probably the final phase of it that I remember. What the attendant kind of PR was. But yeah, I think it's an altogether wonderful story and really positive.
Yeah.
You mentioned his leadership was really incredible, and I think that when they had that meeting and they had that kind of rift that was going on in the leadership, they had that relationship with the Arizona State University or University of Arizona. I can't remember which one. I think it's Arizona State. And they were meeting, and the consultant from the university that was working with them, his name was Alan, I can't think of his last name. And they had this kind of confrontation, and, you know, he thought, well, you know, I'm out, this, you know, I've let everybody down. And Alan came over to John came over to him, John Allen came over to him and said, you know, he gave him a hug and he said, just don't do this again, never do this again. And to me, that really spoke a lot. And I got the sense that John Allen was, you know, a very strong leader because he was so like emotionally in touch with people. He like wanted to care for the people around him just as much as he wanted to care for the earth. He cared for everybody that he was working with, and I think that was a nice moment that kind of demonstrated that leadership.
Yeah, for sure. And they had, you know, great successes, and obviously they were building confidence. And then, you know, they get in touch with some money that likes what they're doing, and then they decide.
$150 million.
Yeah, I had 200 million. Either way,
200.
tons of money.
Yeah.
And they call it the Biosphere II because Biosphere 1 is Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is 8 people are going to live in there for 2 years. And then, as Mike and you guys were hinting to, then all the media attention, you know, to ramp it up. Sensationalism comes into play, and you feel in the story things are starting to slip, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys, John? I didn't really remember. I mean, I remember the Biosphere, and I remember like the Pauly Shore movie, like making fun of it. But it just kind of.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think Biodome, right? John, like you said, though, then it felt like, and not to jump like way ahead, but then it kind of disappeared.
Well, it was kind of discredited, I think, in the popular imagination when they introduced the fresh air, you know, which was, you know, that they didn't really have an option there. God, they're going to kill everybody. I mean, it's
right.
It's all kinds of wonderful analogs with what we're experiencing in the macro now with climate change. It's like, yes, they're demonstrating some of the effects of when you muck with your environment.
Right.
Yeah, who wants to jump in and comment on? I guess the media. The whole media aspect, you know, before they're kind of out in the desert and out on the ocean, and they're kind of like, you know, going.
This is what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
I have something to say.
All right, jump in.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hold on. Give me a second, because this is what I think is interesting. And I think this is really where you have to start looking at things in context, because it isn't just a story about the biosphere. It's a story about, on some level, the ever-changing landscape and cynicism of America. And there's a big part of that, I think, that has to do with the media. And if you go back as far as, sort of the Nixon impeachment, and then if you look at something like the first Gulf War, where you had CNN and it was a 24/7 news cycle, it really gets interesting, because we as a country, particularly in the last, I'd say 30, 40 years, have become much, much more cynical. And I think that that is as an output, and that is an effect, because we are so much more media centric and media driven. And I think it's interesting on some level, because what they were trying to do was so well intentioned. And it was supposed to be like any scientific experiment. They knew that it wasn't going to be flawless the first time, but for some reason, because they couldn't thread that eye of the needle, the media took the flaws of it and ran with that story, and creating.
That's what I was going to say. It's not research if you're trying to, like, I mean, be in the Guinness Book of World Records. Okay, great. It's still the biggest, contained biological system that's ever been created. You're in the history books, you're in the Guinness Book of World Records, but you're in there for the first time ever creating a completely closed system. It is, the whole thing is a research experiment, so I think it's absolutely unfair the way they were treated by the media. Now, part of that is their problem, because they had a huge PR push. They wanted it to be this big deal. They wanted attention. They wanted to get the word out. But I think, that backfired on them, because people, like you said, they kind of turned on them when they let the air in, when they had that CO2 scrubber, or when the woman chopped her finger off, had to come out and get surgery, and she took plastic bags back in or something. I don't know. They didn't really say what was in that bag, but I think that is completely unfair. They needed to frame it as, this is a research experiment. Our goal is 2 years, but throughout this process, we're going to adapt to the environment we've created. And if the environment is becoming harmful to us, we have to take steps, because we can. I think they pushed that oxygen deprivation to the limits. I mean, these people were starving and irritable, and they were coming apart at the seams, and all of a sudden they could take a breath of fresh air. They started running and laughing like they were, and I mean, of course they were probably getting a lot of really good oxygen after nothing, but still, they needed to frame it as an experiment and not as some kind of, we're proving this to the world.
Erica, I completely agree with what you're saying, but you have to remember also, in context of the 1990s and stuff like that, it's a little difficult, because I don't think that they didn't realize that they weren't going to get the benefit of the doubt. I mean, the media, they sort of, I agree with you. From a PR standpoint, we would handle it now in 2020 way differently, or maybe, but I think that we would handle it way differently and try to taper those expectations. Back then, it was a goodwill mission, and they weren't showing the goodwill by the media, I think, on some level.
Right. I mean, yeah, but they were also people were coming up and taking pictures through the glass, watching them wrestle in the mud and stuff. I don't know. They made it a tourist attraction, and I want to know. Maybe you guys caught this. I didn't. If they charged admission for you to go up by the biosphere. Thanks, John. You got biodome in my head. Did you catch that? If they had a fee?
Yes,
they did.
They charged it.
Yeah.
She said they were hoping that would generate some money, but then she said it didn't generate that much money.
Okay. Because I think as soon as you introduce a fee, I'm paying money to go see these people survive in a contained system, that's part of it too. Like the audience, the consumer is also expecting something extraordinary if they're paying for it, you know.
Anyone
Yeah.
else want to comment on the media side, and then we can jump into like climate change and what the biosphere kind of proved as far as our
Well,
actions in the
I just
big
have,
biosphere.
maybe it's a question, it's a question for all of you. If this biosphere, if this experiment was starting tomorrow, what would be different? How would the media
people would
handle
shit
it?
all
How
over
would the
it
producers handle it?
It would be
Right.
partisan. It would be, I think it would be like 100 times more cynical. Like,
I think it would
You
be
would have
like
to handle.
Survivor. I think it would be gamified, and I think that the people inside would be competing with each other.
You would
it'd be
have to
like
handle
Mike,
Jersey
the
Shore.
Survivor fan, what do you think?
I think if you were trying to add legitimacy to it and stuff like that, you'd have to handle it differently. You'd have to have an international community on board with it. And then on top of it, you would have to try to get leaders in the scientific community, different branches, because I think that's one of the things that ends up working against them. They are doing things in the name of science and for mankind, but I bet, it's no secret that all these organizations are competitive with each other. So you would have to try to get something. You would have to try to do an experiment where everybody was pitching in and had equal say at the table, almost like a board of directors. That's how I think that's the only way you could actually make this happen successfully.
What do you think, John and Jesse?
Make what happen exactly?
Like, what if we did a big, biosphere experiment again to, try and make a comment on climate change and living more sustainable.
Yeah, Elon Musk could do it, right?
Well, I remember a few years ago that all came out.
That's what you need. That's what you need. You need something like Elon Musk, right?
Yeah, he was looking for candidates for the space program, and the news made a big spectacle about it, but not about the living conditions and how they would be able to make a habitat on Mars. Like, it's just assumed they have that technology or they know enough. The spectacle now was just who can go, because I think it was when they announced it, it was a mission you couldn't come back from. So whoever would go to Mars would have to stay, and it was the spectacle there. And this time was more about who the person was, and do they have the strength of will to leave behind Earth and never come back. So I don't even think it would like fly today, or people would treat it like a normal shuttle launch where they don't pay attention to it.
Of course, when they designed the Biosphere II, they didn't have the benefit of having seen The Martian.
Right, exactly. I bet the creators of The Martian researched Biosphere II. They're like, here's all the things that can go wrong.
Right.
So this was in the 90s, and I don't remember who said it in the film, but they said when you're out in this huge biosphere on Earth, it's easy to think that your actions don't count, right? That they have no effect. But clearly they do count. So do you guys think that Biosphere 2 was successful in getting the message out in those 2 years, as far as living off the land and living sustainably and greener and cleaner? What do you think as far as some of the missions of the project? I know they were overshadowed by
Okay, so this is hard because on some level they were incredibly successful, but as far as a message and a PR standpoint, I don't want to call it a failure, because I don't think that they were looking for a success failure type of model. I think that they were trying to advance a cause and advance research and move an agenda forward. But obviously, the lessons that we could have learned from it were ignored. I mean, parts per million have continued to go up. We're seeing, our ocean levels continue to rise. It's just like even now we do not heed the warnings that I think Mother Nature is giving us, and a valiant effort. And I would say, sadly, it's probably one that it fell on deaf ears.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I would say they kept talking about like, oh, biospherics. This is the future, and we're gonna be like, this is what we're the founders of.
Yeah, this
And
is the first
yeah,
of many, right?
and I don't think that movement took off in the way they meant for it to. So I feel like it's just its own thing, that stands in this one point in time. But we've only seriously been considering like habitating on other planets like very recently. So I think they all got excited when that was like a trendy topic, like, oh, we could try and make a way to live on another planet. But I don't think it's their fault that it didn't go that way. It's just the technology was a lot slower.
What about one thing that we haven't commented on yet, but was kind of, the whole takeover of Biosphere II, and, having it serve kind of an interesting, I don't know what you call it, like a microcosm of what's going on now. What do you guys think about the whole Steve Bannon twist? What about that shit?
That's the American way. It didn't surprise me at all.
That's exactly what I thought. It's like business people took over, Ed Bass and Steve Bannon they're like, forget the space thing. It's going to be about research. And I didn't realize this, but it was dissolved like a year later. They were just like, no, we're not doing this anymore. And they gave it to Columbia University. We're just done with it. They came in and ruined it. They took away all the things that the people who worked for it, who worked for decades, really, who were on that trajectory and made it what it was after decades. They just came in and were like, well, this doesn't make business sense, and we're not going to do it. But I will say that the two from the original team, I don't have her name in front of me, but there were two people from the original team that actually went to Biosphere II, and they vandalized it. They opened up all these emergency doors and they broke windows because they were doing it in protest of Steve Bannon and Ed Bass and that whole changeover.
That wasn't in the film, right?
And they had to go to court. That was not in the film. I researched that later. I think that, it probably might have been a nice thing to add to kind of say, like, we felt so dedicated to our cause that we went and we let in all the air because we were doing it as this protest. They let in like 10% fresh air, basically. And they believed in what they did. And they actually went to court against Steve Bannon and they won. But they had to pay back like 40 grand to Steve or somebody to pay for the damage that they caused when they broke some of the windows. But I liked that. I think it was a bit of an oversight for the director to not include that because it's reality. I mean, these people were very passionate. They gave their heart and soul to it. And they did things that were not just, stroking the leaf on a tree. It wasn't all just like, we're going to dance. And I mean, they were definitely growing their own pot in there. They like lounged around, like all the videos or the clips of them just kind of lounging and stuff. They were definitely doing some of that. But anyway, like they also were passionate and could be kind of radical and were willing to protest and willing to cause destruction.
Yeah.
And to do an act of sabotage on their own project that they believed in as an act of protest. I wish they'd kept that in.
Yeah, it's an interesting omission. Maybe they felt that they had enough Steve Bannon in there and they didn't want to keep it so much Steve Bannon focused. But yeah, that feels like a big omission. I mean, and just the
Yeah.
whole point of him coming in and saying and being focused on like short-term profit.
Oh yeah.
You know, make this. Let's try and find a way to make this profitable. I mean, it's like, you know, that's just the American way, right? It's like these guys are trying to come up with ways to make the world better, and let's just have a
Yeah.
corporate takeover, and how can we just get profit out of this? It's
Like Mike said, these are people that have the most noblest of intentions, but when the idea gets too big, you can't hide from the machine of profiteering. Not in this country.
Well put. That's well put, Jesse. By the way, I want to just give a shout out to Michaela. I like their Biosphere background that they've got going
They're
on.
in the sphere.
That's good. That's a good backdrop.
In a minute, I'll unmute everybody, and we'll see if Lynn and Michaela wanna join in. But yeah, what did you guys think? I mean, you know, I'm, you know, a member of the Green New Deal coalition here in Erie, and I have to say that you know, my spirit was well, with the group, crushed a little bit at the end of this story. You know, it's like they were on such a trajectory, and they were derailed by, yeah, there was a little split. You know, you could get the sense that not all of them wanted to embrace the media, right? But some of them felt like, hey, if we really want to take this to the next level, you know, put on our PR hat for a minute, and we got to bring in the media. But obviously it was the monster that you know, kind of tore this version of the group apart. But yeah, it's just you know, it did make me a little sad.
Well, I will always be the one kicking and screaming and talking shit, and I don't think we have to worry about that with the Green New Deal, because I'll
what
lose
did you
it.
think? What did you think about Biosphere II and the way it ended up?
So we got the wrong one on Amazon.
Okay. So you can't add anything to the conversation.
No,
That's what we're listening.
Yeah.
Okay. No worries. What about you guys? As far as where it ended up?
You know, I agree with you. It sort of has. I mean, I've read enough at this point. Like, there's plenty of great books out there from the was it the Sixth Extinction and The Water Will Come and stuff like that. I've been trying to keep reading about the different hazards that are on the horizon for us. I think there's a new element watching the doc that I realized, that it's like the media has a real responsibility to the people. Long gone are the days of Edward Murrow and Walter Cronkite and stuff like that. And we are now in this real dangerous era where it's just like there's so much response and knee-jerk response to what is posted from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and even the major networks and stuff like that, that they're doing things for hits, clicks, likes, impressions, and views. But it's like, are they really doing, are all those outlets, no matter if they skew left or right, are they really doing us a service? And after watching this documentary, I was like, shit, we need a better effort from the media.
See, I think not really the media, but I think that we haven't really improved from a sustainability standpoint. I mean, their goal, I mean, they originally were like, let's figure out a way to live in space, because their dreams just kept going. Like, they just were like, we're going to the stars, people. Like, you can't hold us back. That was their goal. They wanted to figure out how to live in space. Okay. But they did all of these sustainability experiments. I mean, they built all of this technology to make the biosphere work. I think that now, like, our culture now is very focused on the technology of saving energy. You know, a lot of the things that we've built to be more energy efficient have kind of made us think that that is what the self-sustainability, but they're two different things. I mean, right now, if you think of someone who has a, you know, like a water filtration system that they've created on their own, if you're, or like a at-home sewage, you know, like how you're processing all of your, growing all of your stuff, you're reusing all your materials, that is nothing, that is not the same idea. When we think about people like that now, most people are just like, oh, they're fringers. Like, people still look at people who are trying to do in their individual lives self-sustainability. That's not what people think about anymore when it comes to advancing a Green New Deal, because that kind of thing is a very macro level approach, you know, cutting, you know, stopping fracking, for example, right? I mean, that is, we're going to stop that altogether. But a self-sustainability movement is like, we've seen since the pandemic that we're now, everyone's growing their victory gardens. Well, before that, we just went to the store, or we called DoorDash, or we had things delivered to us. I mean, we relied on just the convenience. Most people are not growing their own food. And
Right.
here we are in a panic, growing our own food. Some people, not really yet here because it's not harvest time yet, if you will. But the idea is there, but it's still considered like people who are doing self-sustainability, it's fringe. I think people think technology advances are what make the difference, and not necessarily sustainability.
I mean, just think this took place like 30 years ago. And I think what you're commenting on, Erica, and, you know, to add on to what Mike was saying about, you know, the media has a responsibility. We all have a responsibility, right? And we are moving super, super slow, since Biosphere II is like more ambitious than, you know, than what we've talked about this on our podcast and everything, as far as like inspiration. And when we were watching like Troop Zero and saying, you know, that they sent that ship up into space with the voices and stuff like that. Like, we don't have anything like that now. We're so cynical, and we think it's a big deal now if somebody makes some bullshit app for your phone. You know, it's like, that's our big innovation now.
Right, exactly. People think tech advances are equivalent to true moving towards self-sustainability.
John, I see why you like us now.
Okay. Do you guys have something to add about sustainability and the planet? Okay.
I like what you said, Erica.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, girls.
Anyone else want to add some last words about the film before we sign off for the night?
It was, I was very sad at the end. It was a sad feeling. The folks that were still talking to the you know, the one, people couldn't even talk about it. They were like getting up and walking away because they could not even speak about how emotional it was to have to walk away from such a passion. And then 25 years later, here we are, and they're back at the ranch. I mean, they went back to the ranch. These people have spent their entire lives together. And to see that be taken away was, that was very sad.
Yeah, I feel like we lost some real leaders in the environmental movement, right? Like the epilogue to this film, there wasn't much there, right? They all just kind of went apart. Yeah, some of them are back on the ranch, but being back on the ranch, you know, it's like their spirit is crushed.
Yeah.
I can't say it much better than you guys. The only thing I would add is fuck Steve Bannon.
That guy has caused a lot of shit.
Seriously, it's like when he walked onto the screen, I was like, no way.
No way.
Steve Bannon in the 90s.
In the 90s, with his white collared shirt and his khaki pants. He's
But
a little
looking at-
different looking now.
Yeah.
And just as much an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to see, well, if you want to read on Wikipedia, you can about this trial that he lost, but he has some Trumpian descriptions of the women in this
I know that this is going to sound really like Steve Bannon's actually like, and knowing a little bit about his personal history, has like suffered some real personal tragedy in his life, and I can't help but feel that it's karma. like if you treat the world like a piece of shit like he is, then hopefully the world will continue to treat him like a, serve him justice.
Yeah.
Word.
Fuck.
Yeah.
I will say, to bring it back around to some more positivity, I think that the film can be inspiring for people, because seeing this little group of passionate, basically a theater troupe, get together with, like-minded individuals and accomplish some amazing, amazing stuff. I mean, they built this giant biosphere that the whole world paid attention to, and
Really
they built their own ocean vessel that they traveled the world in. I mean, that's inspiring. Yes, this group
that
was
might
crushed.
be the most wild story right there too.
Yeah, this group was ultimately crushed by corporate America and the media and probably some egos. But look at all that they did when they were small. They aimed for the stars and they almost got there.
Yeah. I think that today we very much more idolize individuals that are doing these things. And perhaps it's part of our culture to encourage individuals to do these things and not to to not bring people together. I don't know. I mean, I just think like Elon Musk is a great example. He doesn't work in a bubble, but he also is not like doing trust building exercises with a team of people and building strong emotional bonds with them and marrying them or whatever. I think that he gets the credit. He is the focus. Because like I said right at the beginning, I can't think of any other group that I know of doing things like this. And I'd love to see more groups get this kind of attention and get this kind of support. I think that, John, I think you hit the nail on the head, in that it would be so politicized if you had a group of people. The group is the cult. The group is like a harmful entity, because it's a body that could end up having power. An individual is like, oh, that guy's just kind of off on his own, and free enterprise, he's not, I don't know. I wish that there was more support for groups, as opposed to that's a group of people, they could end up being dangerous politically. So we don't want to encourage that.
Yeah, this was a true grassroots movement. They were really early environmental pioneers. So hopefully it inspires some people that are watching this movie in quarantine. Jesse, you got any last words before we sign off for the night?
I think you guys had some thoughts, but you guys said them more eloquently than me.
Well, thanks for writing them for us.
Yeah, I studied up, Jesse. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. This is our second to last film under quarantine. Our last one is next Wednesday. It's St. Francis, which is a fantastic independent film about women and women's issues. I liked it a whole hell of a lot, and Erica Berlin is going to be our host that night for our panel discussion. So
that's right.
Come back and join us. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.